necessary. So this is the Netwrix reporting console. So again, we have a number of different platforms we can look at, really designed to give you information in a relatively easy to use mechanism. So the first thing I'll show you very quickly is what we call the enterprise overview. This is basically just a mechanism to go in and take a look at what's going on from a more visual perspective. So for example, when you look at different types of data, changes by date, by DC, by object, as well as by user, gives you a little bit different perspective. And so we want you to be able to go in there and say, hey, what type of subnet changes are we making? You know, is that right? Why are we making subnet changes or organizational unit changes? And you can actually drill down into these different data points as well. So if you see somebody who makes a huge number of changes one day, you can go in, really drill down into this and see what's going on. So again, one of the things you can see is we're going to give you the who, what, where, when, the workstation, the DC the change was made against, et cetera. Everything's color coded. We want this to be easy to read because we realize that a lot of auditors are going to see this. So we don't want you to have to be super technical to understand what the data is actually giving you. We want you to go in there and go, okay, that makes sense. We don't want you to have to try to divine what the reports are telling you.
So you're saying that the reports are dumbed down for auditors?
No, they're simply made easier to read. Well, you know, anybody who's gone through the event logs, and it's funny because we show, you know, sometimes during some of the sales things where we go and we show them event logs and what actually gets pulled out of the event logs. And 9 times out of 10, the sales reps are like, oh my God, how do guys actually deal with this? And the answer is not easily, obviously. So for anyone who's actually looked at the logs, they know what a challenge it can be to kind of make heads or tails out of what's actually going on in here. So again, we try to make this easier for everybody in this case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you just kind of the basic functionality, what we've kind of always done and we've always done for a lot of years. And that is primarily a lot of reporting. We have a lot of out-of-the-box reporting. We have some other types of ad hoc reporting, which I'll show you a little bit later as well. But we have reports by platform, so Active Directory, group policy, I'll show you some of those. They're also in here by compliance as well. So for example, PCI. So if you're dealing with PCI, for example, and you want to have your auditors go in here and do some of your own reporting, you can do that. We just give you kind of a quick summary, which I realize is difficult to read from there, but kind of a basic summary of the different requirements that we hit within PCI, within HIPAA, within SOX, et cetera. So this way you can go in and see exactly what we help you guys cover.
Do you cover the whole scope, or is it?
We can't cover the whole scope. So some of the things like penetration testing and stuff like that, obviously that's kind of out of our wheelhouse. But for everything that's kind of within what we do, we give you kind of a quick summary of, hey, these are the points that we help you with, and we're able to give you that visibility. And then again, obviously some of this is a little bit more difficult to pick up.
So this probably is more like a getting started thing for someone who is in an IT role, who is suddenly challenged with, hey, we need to be PCI compliant. You know, it's your job to figure out, because obviously like all the auditors have their own requirements. The different QSAs will come with different interpretations of some of the items there. The environments can be different depending on how they process the data, where they store it, what are the other policies around this. So this is more like a getting started guide. We see that the data that we collect is most relevant to these key requirements within this particular document, whether it is HIPAA or PCI, whatever. And here is how we recommend to use it. But your particular scenario, your particular environment will probably be different. But this will help you to get started and then update it as necessary.
Right. So for SOX, for example, one of the requirements is you need to be able to restore data from backup. So obviously, we're not going to help with that. So there is a bit of a miscommunication with a lot of people who are just stepping into compliance and say, hey, is this just out of the box going to make me compliant? And obviously the answer is no, especially when you're dealing with auditors, because again, the scope's always different, or it sort of shifts. It's always a little, kind of a moving target. So we give you the tools to be able to answer those difficult questions that pop up. And again, this is just kind of a breakdown here of some of the reports that fall under here. So they're basically broken down from a compliance standpoint as well as by a platform standpoint. So for example, under Active Directory, and I'll just kind of go through and show you some relatively basic changes. Let's see, I realize this is off here. So for example, again, if I want to go in and look at something like Active Directory changes, I can do so relatively easily. And again, it's going to give you a lot of detail. And it's going to give it to you in an easy to read format. So again, the first one is I modified a group, the schema admins, something I probably want to take a look at. I removed some users. Again, I'm going to give you all the details, all the before and after values. whether it's something like attribute changes on a user or to a site or anything within the directory structure. Sites and services, schema changes, et cetera. And so you can see a whole bunch of different types of changes that have taken place, again, with all the detail that's out there. There's also at the top, you can see there's a whole bunch of different filters, sorts, et cetera. So if I'm looking for changes made by a specific user, changes made to a specific object, or let's say, for example, changes within a specific container, I can do that. I can use wildcards. So it's a lot of different ways to pull up data here and see different changes that have taken place. So again, yeah, please.
It looks like there's color coding there.
Correct.
Does that have a significance? And
yeah, so we basically have it as removed, modified, and added. So again, we want it to be relatively easy for you to go down and see, hey, it was a user added, was a group modified. Again, just to give you something, a little bit of a visual indicator to see what's going on, to kind of break up some of the reports for you.
But I'm thinking like a vulnerability management report, it's not necessarily stacked by most critical to least critical, or is that?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So yeah, that's correct. So it doesn't work that way currently. We can do some alerts and we can set the priorities and stuff like that, but within the reporting, it's generally just going to give you an overview. So for example, this is a very generic report, all changes, which is good for something like, hey, everything worked yesterday and now nothing's working. So again, you can do some root cause analysis and take a closer look at what's going on.
So are you smart enough to know the completely meaningless changes and filter them out? Like
you can if you'd like. Yeah.
Like this computer and the domain controller decided to change the password on the computer account.
So what we do
happens all the time, but I don't care.
So actually, what we do is we try to translate this like completely machine-generated data into user actions. So we try to always convert those like 20 events in the event log into a single action that was actually performed by a user. So a couple examples there would be some of the changes in Active Directory. You add a user to a group that generates like 25, 30 changes or events in the event log. We only show one. Same thing with, let's say, another big example is SharePoint site creation. When you create a site in SharePoint, it actually rolls out a template that includes all the libraries, lists, views, what have you, right? So that generates like 300 events. We only show one. This user created a site. So we try to do that.
But can you then still dive into that one event showing all what's underneath that? Because you said we collapse 400 to 1, but there might be things in there that I still want to see, okay, but this happened during that one event.
So it probably depends on the use case, but again, we try to put this into an audit trail from the user activity perspective. So it's not that, this user created all items .aspx view, right? Because this user created a site. So that's what we show. So we don't keep all those additional auxiliary, technical, automatically generated events. We only keep the user actions.
Okay.
And you can go through and you can manage. Every environment's a little bit different, so we go into some environments. So for example, Citrix environments, we see a lot of stuff with all the MSTS settings. So MSTS expiry dates, et cetera. And we see a lot of clients where they're like, hey, that's really neat. I never want to see this again. You can go through and you can call out some of that data. For example, one of the things we do is we show you things like administrative password resets, but most people don't want to see user-generated password resets. They're like, great, as long as we're resetting your passwords, I don't care. Some people do. Up to you whether or not you want to see that data. So you can definitely go through and modify this for the scope of what you want to take a closer look at. Again, from a compliance standpoint, we do a lot of different sort of compliance reports. So for example, administrative group membership changes. So just to give you a kind of a quick idea, again, if you've dealt with auditing before, it sounds like many of you have, if I need to be able to see all the administrative group changes in the last month, I can generate this query relatively easily and I can see, oh, I got too many windows here, it's like window madness. I can see, changes to backup operators, server operators, et cetera. And I can generate this data, I can print it, I can spit it out to CSV. I can also schedule this data. So, something like SOX, for example, I might want to go through, I can subscribe to this, and I can basically dump it either to an email address or I can dump it right to a compliance share. So I've seen with auditors, sometimes you want to just give them everything, including the kitchen sink, and sometimes you want to give them nothing except what they asked for explicitly. Whatever you want to go, we can help you out with that. So we can set up these subscriptions to dump everything out monthly. So you have all that data right there for your auditors. Also, when you're doing something like PCI or HIPAA, where you really are required to self-audit, where you have to go in and check to make sure these changes have taken place weekly, monthly, whatever the time frame is. We can have these delivered to you. You can go through, verify everything's good to go, and then kind of, move on with your life. So again, we want to be able to generate this data and spit it out to you relatively easily in this case.
Is this data available via the API as well?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So the API is kind of bidirectional. So we're working with being able to dump the data out to other systems and also be able to pull data in. So for example, working with things like, I don't want to jump ahead, but things like ticketing systems where we can go out and add stuff. So that's something that's in the works at the moment.
So you have kind of behavior templates to summarize all the data in one action, as you told, right?
There are different types of reports that you can run, not necessarily. So I can go in, I can look at things by user, for example, if that's more your question. I can do that. I'll do some more interactive searches later where you can pull down data actually from multiple systems and kind of pull it all together. I'll show you that a little bit later. I wanted to just kind of give you, because I know some of you guys are not familiar with this, I wanted to just give you kind of a core functionality piece, and then I'm going to go out and dive into some other things as well. So again, administrative group memberships, things like state and time data. So this is something that we've been pushing out. And so in this case, obviously, when you're dealing with auditors and they want to know things like, hey, what type of changes took place against my administrative groups, the next follow-up question is, hey, by the way, who's in there right now? I used to do a lot of screenshots. Like I said, you can use PowerShell. There's a lot of painful ways to pull this out. Again, you can go through, you can pull this out. The other cool thing about this data is we're basically snapshotting everything once per day. So I can see, for example, what was in there today. If I want to go back to May 1st of last year, I can see that same data. And you'll see there's no VPN users group because that group actually didn't exist back then. So I can actually see who's in that group today, who is in there last month or last quarter. I can run a change over that same time frame, and all of those should net out. That's probably a little overkill even for your auditors, but again, there's a bunch of different ways to pull out the data and view the data in this case. Real quick, I'll go into some group policy stuff. So one of the neat things about group policy is, again, this is an agentless mechanism. And back in the day, there were really only two ways to get data, and that's either through logs or through an agent. Again, we're not a big fan of agents because we don't like to get crazed calls in the middle of the night any more than you guys do. So we want to be able to give you the data. We want to be able to do all the heavy lifting on here, but we need to be able to give you the detail, right? So obviously, when you make a group policy change, the logs are terrible. I mean, there's just no other way about it. There's almost nothing in there. It's of use or value. So it just gives you kind of the who and the when and the GUID of the GPO that was changed. So here and again, we're using this mechanism where we combine all of these different streams of data together to give you a lot more information. Again, still in an agentless mechanism. So here I can see that New York policy was changed by this guy and his date and time. Again, the where, DC, and the workstation, as well as the actual details, which you guys may not be able to see, but just to give you a quick overview. Account lockout duration was changed from 30 minutes to 20. I added audit system events for failure. Modified allow logon locally for different users. So again, all the different changes within GPOs, whether it be a sort of attribute change, you change WMI filters, you link or unlink something to a container. Again, you don't see a lot of stuff for compliance per se, but again, we've all dealt with GPOs and their power for good or evil and how that kind of runs off the rails sometimes. And being able to go back and say, hey, why is nothing working? Something clearly must have changed, gives you some additional availability. There is also, again, from more of a compliance perspective, again, you have the state and time idea where you can go in and see what my current policies are. So I may not want to have a full listing of all my policies, for example, but maybe I'll do something like this where I can just see a monthly, let's see, I'll just type in defaults here, where I can kind of pop in here and see what my password policy is on my default domain policy. Again, I can just have this spit out once a month, once a quarter, just to verify everything's good to go. I can see changes. So again, from a compliance perspective and a security perspective, you can see what's changed, what things are right now.
Can you flip that around in either of two ways? You've got an IT administrator who you worried is doing funny things. Can you say, what has he or she been doing at that amount of time? And also the other thing, something's going wrong on my network. I don't know what's happening. It started 2 hours ago. Can I have all changes across all environments for the last 3 hours so I can maybe see what's changed.
Time to go to search.
Yeah, so you could definitely use the search mechanism to do that. And I'm going to show you some neat ways to kind of pull all the different data
that sounds
perspectives together. And so you can do something like, hey, I want to see everything that a user did across all systems in a certain time frame.
But the quick answer is yes, we can do both.
Yeah, so this, just so you're aware, this product, because it is not agent-based, is kind of batch-oriented. So we do go out and pull down data as well. So depending on the frequency that you're pulling the data also changes how frequently you can.
How does it grab things from AD? Is it WMI then, if it's agentless? Or?
Yeah, it's basically going to be WMI. Again, you can use a compression service or not. So we can basically pull all the data across the network. Or what we can do is we have a small service that sits there. It's set for manual. It's not running, except when we call it. So it'll call, it'll pop up, and basically it'll grab the logs locally, do kind of a snapshot, look at things like the update sequence number, it compresses all that data down, shoots it over the Netwrix server that does all the heavy lifting, and then shuts itself off. So again, we want your domain controllers to do things like authenticate users rather than just do all of our work. Funny how that works sometimes. So again, just designed to give you a little bit better idea as far as what's going on. This is kind of the core of what we've always done. It's really about reporting analysis for compliance, for security, and root cause analysis. So at this point, I'm going to go in a little bit more detail. I'm going to stay kind of in the reporting section here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about user data and the way we look at user data. So for example, I'll show you kind of the direction that we're going with some of this information. So for example, we talked a little bit about Exchange Online. You can do things like non-owner access events. So I can see things like changes to Exchange organizations. I create a store, or I create a relay or something. But you can also see things like who's actually going into the mailboxes, as well as who's giving someone access to mailboxes. So if I want to go in here and see, this guy here is accessing this person's mailbox, I can see what messages are being read, deleted, etc. So it gives you a neat tool to be able to see what's going on within Exchange. And we have the same mechanism within Exchange Online as well. So if you want, you can go in and drill down into the same kind of level of detail. We see this mostly, frankly, for tracking admin activity. But we've seen it also for things like intellectual property or information that's gotten out, tracking things like shared folders, stuff like that. So again, gives you a neat mechanism beyond just who's been given access to a mailbox, but also what's actually going on within that mailbox. I'm going to kind of touch through these just real quick. There's SharePoint as well. SharePoint, again, is going to give you a whole different group of changes. So we're going to look at stuff like the content audit information. So if I want to go in and see content changes, for example, things that have been checked out, deleted, etc., I can do that. So let me see. I'll roll this back. I can go in here and just kind of see what's going on. Again, we give you a lot of different drop downs. You can go in and see things like, hey, I just want to see things that were modified, etc. And then you can also see, again, as Ilya mentioned earlier, besides just sort of the document and the content changes, you can also see form level changes, security changes. So again, this is a case where we use a number of different mechanisms to kind of pull all this data together, correlate it in a single place for you, and be able to spit this out. So you can see what your users are doing besides just sort of administrative tasks. And you can see this actually pretty heavily in file server. So file server, we've always been able to give you things like changes, right? So if I want to go in here and look at changes, I can do that. I can see files and folders that have been deleted, security changes, that type of thing. So if I want to see things like just security changes on folders, I can do that. There's separate reports where I can spit that out once a week or once a month just to see that type of information. Something like files have been deleted, that's kind of ad hoc. Hey, what'd you guys do with my files? Hey, your colleague deleted it. Or you deleted it, which is often the case as well.
Usually.
Yeah. So that type of information reads who's accessing files. And then not long ago, we added, again, some more what we call state and time data, what's going on currently. So in this case, I can go through and do who actually has access right now. So for example, I think you were mentioning this earlier, so if I were looking, let's see, engineering, I'll do no for now, and I'll say I want to see all subfolders. So this goes back a little bit more to what you were saying earlier. So in this case, what we do is we look at data engineering. I can see built-in admins, this guy, engineering will have full control, safety has read access only.
Hey Jeff, can you zoom in?
Oh yeah.
Because it's really hard to see.
The zoom piece.
Yeah. You've got right here 100%.
Oh, that's right. Thanks. is a little.
Wow, that's much
you guys-
better.
What's going on? Holy cow. So, yeah, sorry about that. It looks perfect here, by the way. So yeah, please call me out if you can't read it. So again, just gives you a little better idea what's going on. We're looking at all subfolders, but the cool thing is we hide by default subfolders that have inherited permissions. So if you've got 1,000 subfolders and all but 3 of them are different, likely you only care about the 3 that are different.
Oh, that's really good. There's nothing more annoying than
Exactly.
1,000 pages when only 3 things are different.
Exactly. So this one, for example, has the same permissions, but the reason it shows up here is because I broke the chain of inheritance. And then this one is just different. And then the cool thing is, again, you can look at this one report a couple different ways. The other way is, you were talking about earlier about nested groups. So that's great. I can see who explicitly has access, but I can also go in here if I want to see who actually has access to this. It's a little bit different story, obviously. I can do that as well. And I can blow up the groups and see, hey, these are the people that actually have access to your stuff.
And does that expand recursively?
Yes.
Yes. So anybody who's in a group anywhere down the line will
Right.
roll up in here.
Yeah, because I'm in a group that's in a group that's in a group that's in a group that
Yeah. Best practice is not to go too crazy. But
People do.
nobody follows best practices,
yeah. There's
especially.
best practice, and then there's what actually happens. So.
Yeah.
But
And,
again,
and so all this data is still coming from Windows.
correct. Yeah, that's
Okay.
correct. So we're basically
You-
drilling
no,
down. in-
you don't have an equivalent of this for enterprise NAS, right?
Well, we do have functionality for NetApp and EMC. Right now, there's a weirdness with it as far as some of the local groups that it's going to be fixed in the next release as well. But you can pull down some very similar data with things like NetApp CIF shares, EMC devices, etc.
Good.
Does this just expand all of those nested groups into one list, or do you have a view of the nested groups, a tree view of the nested groups?
Oh, so in this case, it's just going to expand out all the lists. If you want to go in, you can see there's like a link.
Basically, it gives you the effective list of users who have any access to this particular resource. So this is more from the object perspective.
So if I want to
But
see
then if I
something like
click on that
what,
group,
Yeah,
groups
then you
this
can-
guy's a
yeah, you
member of,
can-
I can do that as well.
oh,
you can
yeah,
fix that.
see, but what we want there is,
The full chain of
Nested tree,
inheritance.
yeah.
no, when I click on that group link, I want to know how it is for this folder he got permissions.
Right.
Not what are all the group, because now there's 4
Again,
pieces
with
of
some
paper
the
I got to look
nested
at.
Pieces, you can
Right.
see again. You can see it at the group level, and then you can see it kind of blown out. It's a little
Yeah.
bit difficult because
No, but when I click on that group list, I want it to say,
Yeah, that's
this user has permission to this folder because he's a member of this group, and if necessary, because that group is a member of this group.
Whereas I want that list of the groups the user is a member of by clicking on the username, not on the word group.
Right. Yeah, for other purposes.
Yeah, so we have
Because to actually say, I want to make sure this guy doesn't have permission,
right.
with this
we
is
have a
like,
similar report for Active Directory that gives you effective permissions. The problem though is it tends to be enormous because you'll wind up, and it'll throw them all out there. So it'll be like, hey, the administrator has access because he's the administrator and he's explicitly defined. He's part of the enterprise admins group. He's part of the main admins group. He's part of, and so you get this long, incredibly difficult list. And we may wind up putting something like that in there. I mean, the data's in there to kind of be able to pull some information from, but it's a lot of information.
Okay.
So a couple of things here. So first, you are correct. We don't show this full chain of inheritance or nesting rather. So this is something that we have to work on to add. What I wanted to point out here is that we have like both ways to look at these permissions from the object perspective. This is what we were looking at. So this is the resource. I want to see all the users who have access, but we can do the other way around also. Here is the user. I am about to fire him. I want to know, what data he has access to, right?
That's nearly impossible to do at the moment. You can't look at a user in Active Directory and
So-
say which file servers do you have access
So this is what we have as well.
Wow.
And by default, actually, it opens with with 2 entries, everyone and NT authenticated users.
Yeah.
So that right away, some of our customers, even like in POC sort of scenario, they open it up and then say, hey, 1 second, I have to call someone in security.
yes.
Did you have then a sort of alerting kind of thing? If somebody goes and creates a file share with everyone with full control,
So alerting is so yeah, you can do that.
Maybe not an alert, but even a
Yeah,
report.
you can do like a daily report for that, so that you can get
So you can
notifications
say,
for that.
Tell me
Yeah,
all
absolutely.
about the file servers that are everyone full control.
Yep.
Someone's going to go and set up a file.
Yeah,
server.
you can definitely do that.
Okay.
Yeah, we do a lot of that. When we do a lot of POCs, and one of my colleagues in particular always likes to do on a file server POC. He always says, "Hey, do you guys use the Everyone group?" And of course, the answer is no. And then he brings up the report, and 12 pages of Everyone group later, obviously maybe they're not using it, but somebody in the organization.
Yeah, well,
So-
that also depends on whether you're using the Everyone group at share permissions or at NTFS permissions.
So
Because
this
share
actually
permissions, I don't care.
This actually combines the effective permissions, both. So regardless of which are more restrictive, we will show you the actual access.
And so now what we're doing is we're kind of combining some of this data together as well. So I can see things like changes, reads, who has access, et cetera. And so what we've done in this most recent release is giving you some additional types of data as well. So things like excessive access permissions. So let's say, for example, I want to go in here and I want to look at, my HR directory, for example. And I want to see, anyone who hasn't accessed this in the last 90 days, for example. So in this case, I can go in here and I can see that, hey, this HR data directory, these people all have access to this directory. They all have full control, and they have all accessed this 0 times. Now, just so you don't think this report actually has no information at all, if I just change the times accessed upper limit here, you can see it does give you people who have actually accessed this, and they get kind of dropped off. So in this case, you can see that about 3 of the 15 or 20 people that actually have full control of this actually do anything with it. And then you can actually drill down into it and see what their access is. You can also view this kind of from the opposite direction if you want, where if you have some, files, hey, does anyone use these old WordPerfect files? Probably not, but you won't know until you delete them or move them or change access to them, in which case then you'll get some weird call from somebody you've never heard of before. So
Illegal.
yeah, exactly.
Because it's WordPerfect. It's always legal.
So again, you can see this data a couple different ways, and it's really designed to help you manage what's going on, figure out what's going on, give you some additional visibility into really what's actually going out there.
Okay, but the data flow is all from source to you to report. There's no, you don't have a fixit button that brings me back.
No,
Currently,
we
no.
basically see ourselves as getting the user data, showing it to you, and then one of the use cases with the API that we kind of expect to start popping up is that fixit button. We have to build that extensibility into the client yet. It's not there yet. It's already possible with scripts. You can take the data objects as input for your scripting. We just released that, so we haven't seen those use cases yet.
Okay.
But we expect that this will be one of the important cases there, definitely.
But if I found, if I said, there should never be everyone full control NTFS permissions, I could use your API to get a list of folders that my PowerShell has to go fix.
Yes. You can definitely use the API to actually get information about these shares being created. As soon as this is created, as soon as permissions are changed, you can get that.
It would be the right way to do it also, right? I don't think it would be,
So
for an auditor, it would not be a great idea if you had the fix-it button.
right, so that's why we focus on the data, right?
Yeah.
And then what you want to do with the data, go crazy.
The auditor's not having write permission anyway, so that,
Yeah, that's an additional
from the
from the,
RBAC implementation that this person's allowed to close the loop and fucks up.
from the sales perspective. There would be an additional subscription to show that button.
Of course. It's not like we want you to go broke.
So
Yeah, there was a question.
yeah, please.
The file servers are often very large, so how often do you scan them for changes?
So it varies, and we can scan them a couple different ways. So again, we can actually change the frequency at which we scan, and it's how we scan them as well. So for things like NetApp and EMC devices, for example, we rely pretty heavily on some of the logging there, and so we can pull that data relatively quickly, every few minutes if you'd like. But when we do something like a snapshot where we want to drop everything into state and time data, that can be difficult on really large shares, because obviously if I'm going in, I'm going to enumerate all the permissions and I'm going to store all that stuff in the database. you can tell that's going to get large. So we normally do that daily. For really large pieces, what we'll do is we'll set it up weekly. We'll have it run on like a Sunday or something. This way it'll just go through and crank out while nobody's doing anything. And then you can, again, set up a thing like a subscription to say, hey, security changes took place. Obviously, this is going to be a difference here, which is much easier and faster to pick up than it is going to be for me to re-enumerate all the permissions again. And again, with something like the subscriptions, you can set up daily reports. And one of the neat things about the subscription mechanism is you can, by default, it only sends reports that are not empty. So you can basically set up these different types of changes. So for example, I went into here, like the user activity piece, and I wanted to create a user activity summary of, say, let me look at the last, yeah, sure, I'll look at this date time frame. You can see there's basically some thresholding mechanisms, basically. So I might want to go in here and say, hey, you know what? I want to
zoom in again because it's
yeah, they make this larger.
Barely.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, I might want to go in and actually see what's going on. But you know, again, I can drill down into these failed attempts, deletions, reads, etc. But I can also set these different threshold mechanisms. So maybe I want to do something like, hey, I want to see anytime a particular user reads or changes X number of files within a certain time frame. So if I go in here to reads and I specify, and you can just take my word for it that it's in here, it's way too high, specify 1100. Let's say 100. It'll go through, and in this case, again, it's going to be over that threshold. And so in this case, this report would be created in the morning, it would get spit out. So again, if you wanted to let your HR director know changes that have taken place on a share, or hey, why is somebody reading 1,000 files in a particular directory, that's something I want to take a closer look at, right? So I had a client recently where they had their HR director had been there for years and she had left, and she basically said, hey, you know what? I basically created all this documentation. I'm taking it with me, and I'm going to delete everything, which is basically what she did. And unfortunately for them, they didn't realize that until months later. So they were able to restore some of it, but not all of it, unfortunately. So again, when you get these, you know, ownership issues where people think they own the data, and even when you don't, I mean, again, you want to be able to, it's really about limiting data too, right? So when you deal with things like CryptoLocker, for example, again, we don't actively drop CryptoLocker, but we want to tell you, hey, these guys have full control of everything. That probably shouldn't be the case, right? So it allows you to kind of segment things and see what people actually need to have access to versus what they have access to. We did, interestingly, we do a lot of polls, and we read a lot of other polls as well, like the Verizon polls and stuff like that. And one of the things we've seen recently that I thought was interesting is, back in the old days, everyone was like, oh, I don't have enough access. But now, the newest polls show that most people feel they have too much access. They have too much access to stuff. So you have to know that if the users think they have too much access, they probably have too much access.
Yeah, but they never actually tell you they think they have too much
Well,
access.
that's why that excessive permissions report kind of helps you show, hey, this guy has access but never uses it. So
you
might
have
want to
sort of some, I'm thinking of some sort of anomaly detection to say I've got this HR folder that hasn't been accessed for a long time or has 10 file reads a day, and now all of a sudden, you know, I'm having 1,000 reads or something like that.
So nothing that intelligent per se, but again, you can set up different thresholds, because again, your network's going to be wildly different from mine or his or someone else's.
The data is there. You could say if my file reads are more than double or more than 100%, for example, I could tell me about it if you want.
So what we do and what we don't do. We have the data there, and the reports that we have, the logic is that you can show like aggregates reports and have the thresholds as filters. We don't add that statistical logic that you're talking about, that, you know, based on the monthly average, you know, see the difference and things like that.
You have a platform, somebody could build.
However, yeah, you can get that data and, you know, do more sophisticated things with that, or maybe we do them, you know, in some of the future.
How hard would it be for me to do something like accounts in this group logged in more than X hours a day? Because I have worked in a couple of places where they actually, where administrators actually have the administrator account and the real user account, and they're not supposed to be logged in as the administrator account all day.
So we probably won't show you the details about the session duration.
Yeah, that's
What we will be able to show you is we will be able to show you the logons, obviously. So if they log on during, let's say, non-working hours, you can kind of spot that.
Yeah.
And we will be able to show you the complete track of activity with that admin account. So not necessarily the fact that they're logged in.
Yeah,
But
it's-
here are the actual.
Right. It's the session duration which isn't logged.
Right.
Is okay.
You could log the session with the video.
Yeah, with the
capability.
with the video.
You could take the video application
And then
we
enjoy
have,
watching
which
that.
we mentioned at the beginning for self-auditing, and link it to the account, and that would log. In the beginning, it's grayscale. What is it? 1 frame.
Yeah, 1 frame per second.
1 frame per
All-
second.
all-
So
all-
the size of the file is pretty small. So you could run it like that. That's a way where customers,
Yeah.
they have, let's say, interesting ideas, which we come up with, but in a good way. So consultants usually in organizations, if you log in and they want to track for both sides, if suddenly a group is deleted, you want to also have a proof that you didn't do it. So for external consultants, that feature is used for training. If you modify something, if you want to record it, and once a year, maybe someone else should do it. You don't have to sit next to him. Just say, hey, this is what it looks like. For terminal servers, when multiple people log in to record what's happening. So there are different ways how to use the technology.
Actually, let's just look at some of those ways.
So on that note,
Since you started talking about search and videos and
so I
everything.
just wanted to show you guys briefly. So obviously we have a ton of reports. I don't think anyone will really doubt that. But one of the things that we found is sometimes people say, hey, that's great. I need a report that gives me X, or I need to be able to pull some stuff. We do have some enterprise-wide reporting as well. But this is kind of a neat mechanism. This is what we call the interactive search, and it allows you to do queries against basically all the data. So I can do a query against all the different databases, and I can do text queries, I can do who queries. So for example, if I saw something that I didn't like, for example, let's see, so I've got this account here, and I saw that she had delegated authority to an OU with some weird service account. So I might want to say, hey, you know what? I want to see all of the instances where this particular user, which I can't make this any larger, unfortunately, but it would just, you'll have to take my word for it. So in this particular case, it's going to bring up any changes made by this admin with SVC in any of the fields. So again, you can do searches on text, you can do it on the action, the what, the when, the where. So again, if I want to do a certain time frame, it's very easy for me to look at the last few days, the last week, the last 6 months. So again, if somebody's leaving and I want to go through and see what's going on, I can do that. Also, if I want to do something like a permission search, I can do that with text. I can bring all the stuff up. And actually, one of the cool things is I can go through, and beyond using these, I can actually use the records themselves to include and exclude data. So for example, if I wanted to go in, again, I've got a guy who used to work on SharePoint and file servers primarily, but he's a domain admin. I want to see what he's been doing the last 6 months. I can go in and exclude file server or SharePoint data and see everything that's kind of outside of the scope that he normally works in. So it gives you a little bit different type of query to see what's going on. So in this particular case, and again, you can't really see this very easily, so I'll apologize for that, but one of the things you would be able to see if it was large enough is, in this case, I went through and I created this service account called Service Account Cleanup. I went through and actually delegated myself the ability to, gave myself access to the payroll folder, made some database changes where I went in and gave this particular account the ability to be database owner on the payroll directory, stuff like that. Also, I delegated myself the ability to add myself to any group to the users container. So if I want to add myself to the domain admins group, I can do so without actually making myself a domain admin before I leave. So again, you'll see these different types of security delegations that roll up as well that are a little bit harder to find. I used to struggle with looking for those, and it was usually more along the lines of you're looking at the security of an OU or an object, and you thought to yourself, hey, where did this come from? So again, we want to be able to give you that capability to see who made those types of changes in that environment. And so again, in this case, you can see all the different types of changes right down to giving this account administrative access on a couple of local servers as well. So again, helps you kind of scope down what's going on. The other thing too that you can do is pretty much all this data is searchable, which is pretty cool. So even the video is searchable. So let's say, for example, I have a consultant in here doing some IAS work. I could go in here and do some searches in here as well. So you can see some video stuff down here. So this guy here went into IAS Manager, and I can actually, it'll show you the date, time. And the way this is searchable is, it's searchable by, obviously, who made the change, the machine, the window title, as well as the application. So you can do application level filtering as well. So if you want to look at something like, hey, I want to see every time SQL Server Management Studio is opened on any other workstations or servers, you can have it bring up and start recording data. So for example, in this case, well, IAS Manager, and this is going to be really difficult to see probably, but you can just take my word for it. You can kind of see it.
Can you right-click it and say full screen? Zoom,
maybe.
zoom, and full screen. Just make, nah.
Well, that's probably no better, but sorry about that. You can play around with it. But what this will do is, again, and Arno mentioned this earlier, we can record video. It's basically going to be screen captures. So it's going to be 1 frame per second. You can change the resolution, and it's going to be grayscale. So what that does is it gives you, at least in theory, an easy to view idea of what's going on, a full blow-by-blow of what's going on. And you can see this, but it doesn't take up a lot of space. You can use this on workstations. You can use it on servers. We have people just use it on machines that consultants are working on. So for example, something like IAS, you're either familiar with IAS or you're not really. I mean, it's really no in between for the most part. So if you're curious, hey, what's going on? Again, Arno mentioned there's a huge number of use cases where we've seen people just record. They'll literally make training videos, or hey, I only make this change to our phone system every 6 months. I'm going to record myself making it, and then do this. Also, it can pop up and warn you or not. So if you get one of those requests for, hey, Bob's here, we don't really know what he does, we think the answer is nothing, you can push this out into Bob's machine, it can record silently. On the other hand, you might want to push it out to some of your servers. So for example, I had a client who pushed it out onto his new HR system without telling anybody, and he happened to look a few days later, and 5 of his admins, he had 12 seconds worth of video for all of them. And it was funny because it showed them clearly logging in, starting to poke around. It said, hey, you're being recorded. They clicked OK and then logged off. So again, you can use this as a deterrent as well for passive security. So again, a lot of neat stuff there. So again, we see this a lot with contractors, a lot of consultants. We see it with consultants who are tired of being blamed for user changes. So there's a couple there. There's a bunch of different use cases. More so, again, this is one of those neat things where clients come with all kinds of cool stuff from out of the woodwork. Again, as you mentioned, sometimes the client ideas are a little bit wacky, but some of these are really, really pretty cool. So again, you can go through the video is searchable. And again, when you're dealing with stuff like contractors, I'll just mention this briefly and then I'll turn it back over to Ilya. But again, we don't do a lot of management. We do have a restore capability for Active Directory. So you can restore things like deleted objects, also changed objects. So if you have that script that you forgot to change the attribute on, and it goes through and wipes out everybody's direct dials, no problem, you can roll that type of stuff back. You can also, there's a thing that's really designed especially for contractors called inactive users, which I'll show you just very briefly and before Ilya gives me the hook. And again, this is going to be probably hard to see. Not too bad, you can kind of see it. But basically this is designed to look at accounts that haven't logged in a while. It can report on them, it can also take action against them. It can do something simple as emailing the manager. So if you're using the manager field in AD, it can send an email, hey, this guy hasn't logged in 40 days. Is there something you forgot to tell us? It'll work with users, it'll work with machines. You can do different criteria by OU as well. So again, if you have temporary employees, contract employees, especially after the target breach, people are even more paranoid about them. But again, they're in a lot of compliance requirements as well. You can say, hey, you know what, for my temporary employees, after 5 days, I want to know about it. I want to let their manager know. And after 7, I'll just disable them. It's just safer that way. So we do have a little bit of management capabilities, but again, our primary focus is around reporting.